hear the sounds of your heartbeat. I can hear it now. I can hear it now. I hear the sounds of your heartbeat. I can hear it now. I can hear it now. I hear the sounds of your heartbeat. I can hear it now. I can hear it.
All right, so for today's Heartbeat episode, I've got Darshan Maharaja. Did I say that right, Darshan?
You did, yes.
Perfect. All right, now Darshan Maharaja is kind of a prominent voice on Twitter, I'm going to say. I follow a lot of, a lot of his posts. He's got some interesting political things to say, and Darshan sets him out as just seeing Canadian issues through a multicultural lens, which I think is important. Now, in addition to this, and I'll share some links in the posts. Darshan does have his own website where he does some reading, and then he does some of his own YouTube content, some elevator chats. So, Darshan, I'm gonna take it away, man. Give me the 11-second pitch on who you are, and we'll just hop into some conversation.
Well, I was born and grew up in India, became a chartered accountant, then moved around, lived in Kenya for a few years, then in Dubai for another few years. Came to Canada about 20 years ago, and it took me about a decade clean to have enough room in my life to focus on political issues. And then last few years, I've been commenting on things that I see where there are some parts of the discussion that I feel are missing, and I try to fill that gap, basically.
And I agree with you. There are large parts of the conversation that are missing, and we don't get to see the discussions, and I think that's the biggest problem on them. The left side has their talking points, the right side has their talking points, but the people that are in the middle, we're often the ones that are lost in, we either have to take a side without understanding the information, or we ignore the conversations completely and try and get on with our lives, which doesn't seem to be working. So we had kind of a little pre-chat before this, and you'd sent over a couple of links or a couple of screenshots to me about the amount of immigration that's coming into Canada. And I believe it was just today that Trudeau had made a statement on that, saying that we're seeing too much immigration. Trudeau
Yes.
is saying that we're
Yes.
seeing too much immigration. Geez, if there was only somebody he could talk to about that, right?
Yeah, he's talking like he's a bystander, basically, not like someone who oversees the whole policy.
And now we know Mark Miller is actually the immigration minister, right?
Yes.
And Mark Miller's obviously a liberal, and that's part of his cabinet. So, it's not like he couldn't just, pick up the phone and say, hey, Mark, can we stem the flow here a little bit? So yeah, it's like you said, he's like a bystander here. Now, I don't know where the idea came into play, but are you familiar with the Century Project?
Century Initiative, yes.
Century Initiative. Sorry, thanks for correcting
Yes.
me on that.
Right.
And correct me if I'm wrong here, but the Century Initiative is to have 100 million people in Canada by 2100.
That's right.
And we're at about 41 million now, which means over the next, like 70-ish years, we're going to be taking in another 60 million people, which seems pretty excessive because we can't keep up to the growth that we have now. We're not growing ergonomically. We're trying to force too many people in at the same time.
See, the whole focus has got it exactly backwards because population increases when there is economic growth. Whereas our contention as a nation is that increased population will cause economic growth.
And that's right. So, we see cause and effect. Instead, we're trying to cause the effect and hopefully get the same outcomes, right?
Right.
Doesn't seem to be working.
Yeah, the first thing about this target of century initiative is that it's all very neatly round numbers. Like, how did they arrive at this 100 million? Why not, let's say, 107 million? Or why not 96 million? It's a neatly round number that plays well in communications. By the year 2100, so it is far enough out for anyone responsible for any problems that the initiative causes to have passed. So they will not face the music in case the policy turns out to be wrong, which it is increasingly apparent is turning out to be wrong.
Yeah, and we see a lot of that in climate change. They're now starting to, instead of calling for climate collapse every 5 years, they're now pushing it out to decades. For the reason being is because they won't be in their same positions, or they'll hopefully be dead by the time their forecasts come into play, right? So yeah, they're throwing these things in and changing policy in Canada for times when they're not going to be around, when none of us are going to be alive still to talk about it. But we're here to talk about it right now, and we're here to try and impact some change and say, hey, what we're seeing is not not believable in the context that you're putting it in.
Well, first of all, the climate policy is in violent conflict with the immigration policy, because you are basically moving people from low energy consumption jurisdictions to Canada, which is one of the highest energy consumption jurisdictions because of our climate and our geography. So, if you move 1 million people from, let's say, China or India to Canada, global emissions go up automatically. So there is a conflict between the two policies, but that is um, something unmentionable in public debates.
And I was looking at that exact same thing yesterday. We've increased the population through immigration by 5% over the last 4 years. But yet at the same time, we say that our GHG output is less. Well, how are we creating so much more homes, so many more vehicles on the roads, have so many more people using, and we're not using any modernized technology. I mean, they're just starting to flip to heat pumps off of coal energy in the Atlantic provinces.
Right.
So how is it that we're seeing these reductions? Well, they're all calculations. And one of the most amazing things that I'd seen about the people whose hair spontaneously ignites when we talk about climate is they talk about other countries as our emissions per capita, and it's because we have a very large country, a very large landmass that doesn't have a lot of people in it. Then our emissions look higher output per individual, which is a really stupid way of looking at things because we live in a really inhospitable climate.
That's right. See, there has to be a benchmark as to the same per capita measure cannot apply to different parts of the world, because there are parts of the world, like I've lived in Nairobi, Kenya, which is at an altitude of about 5,000 feet above mean sea level. You don't need that much energy to just live in that city, because see, there was no fan. Forget air conditioning. There was no fan. I mean, some people tried to import them from India and basically closed up shop because there was no demand for that. You don't need heating. You don't need cooling. Temperature never went above 27 degrees, and that was on a few days in a span of 6 years. Otherwise, it never used to exceed 23 degrees. Now it has changed a little bit because of increased population and all. But there are places in the world where you don't need so much energy. Whereas if you are, let's say, in Fort McMurray or Edmonton, you're going to naturally need a lot more energy just to live. So, that per capita measure is like apples and oranges when you're looking at different jurisdictions.
Which seems kind of incredible because on the same token is Trudeau's given a bunch of money to the Philippines, and he's given a bunch of money to the Caribbean for fighting. And I'd spent a month in the West Indies, island called Dominica. And it was around Christmas time. So like I was flying out from minus 20s temperatures in Canada at that time. And I stayed there for a month. So I mean, the entire time that we were there, we didn't we didn't need, of course, the same warming. Now, my family was still at home, but me, I was in the tropics. They were here freezing their butts off. So there, because there was some work that was being done in the home that we were in, we didn't have a lot of use of electricity, and everything was 220, and everything that we had was 110. So even the electricity or the energy that was available was still not being used, and there were a lot of people that are still on the island that don't even have a running fridge or that don't have running electricity. They'll have lights or candles, but I mean, it's like battery power. It's still a third world country by all standards and by consideration. So the energy consumption inside of the Caribbean, much the same. I mean, get outside of the touristy places that demand high amounts of air conditioning, and the requirement for energy, maybe not as great as what we're going to see in Canada. But let's look at a place like, I looked at certain districts inside of Texas, and there are places in Texas that use more energy than all of Canada.
Yeah, I have lived in Dubai. I know how much energy usage is there because see, the day I came to Canada, I was flying out from Dubai, landing in Toronto, and it was 43 degrees there and minus 18 here. So for me, it was like a 61-degree difference,
Yeah.
right? So there you can't function without air conditioning. So their energy usage is, I mean, comparable to that of Canada. But we want to first of all generate prosperity by bringing people over instead of prosperity being generated and attracting people to come here. And then in the last couple of years, the way the whole policy has gone off the rails completely. I've been writing about that extensively. You have seen that on Twitter. And that has now seeped into the social part of our lives, where, primarily because there are too many people coming from one particular origin, that is India. And in case of international students, there is no background police check. Now you have something like 6.5% of the population in Canada that has not gone through that police check. And I'll be frank here, it's not a foolproof thing. I know how India functions. You can get a police clearance certificate regardless of what you've been up to until that point in time. But to the extent that it was useful, that screening has been dispensed with for hundreds of thousands of people. We have now more than 1 million international students living here, plus the temporary foreign workers. Now, this is not to suggest that all of them are criminals, but when you do away with a process that is meant to filter out people based on their criminal record, you're going to naturally have some problems. The bad apples will make it through.
Yeah, and when we took all the time and consideration over the last couple of years of checking vaccination schedules, when the entire world was focused on if you'd had a jab or not, people that we're allowing into our country, we didn't seem to care what they had for a criminal background.
Yeah, true. And see, the video that sparked this discussion, I mean, it has gone super viral. It has more than 5 million impressions, which is seriously impressive because, given Canada's population, it has over 17,000 likes and almost 5,000 retweets, 1,200 bookmarks. It's super viral by any metric. The reason is because this has now started affecting people, at least mentally, if not physically, because you have all this housing crisis, which it was forbidden until a few months ago to even mention that, too many people coming in is causing a housing crisis. It was said to be racist or xenophobic. Those are the, conversation stoppers that we have sanctified in our society that prevent meaningful action from being taken in good time. So again, going back to the criminality part of it, if you stop screening people for their criminal background, then some bad apples will make it through. And when you are bringing in hundreds of thousands of people every year without that screening, those bad apples will be quite a few in number, although tiny in percentage. And that is bound to impact on, I mean, some of the uh, responses to that video were, they were bringing out the worst in human instincts, saying that, Canada was built by Europeans and therefore, no brown people should be here, things like that. Now, these are things that were under the surface until now, and that is, see, I have going back 6 7 years, I have experience of dealing with people with such extreme views, but they were never uh, all that confident about voicing those views outside of their tight circle. But now they have that confidence because it has become possible to discuss immigration, as Prime Minister Trudeau demonstrated today. It has become possible to talk about too much immigration. So then you are going to have all sorts of wild views being brought forth, and that is not good for social cohesion.
And in Trudeau's statement today, he said that we're bringing in about 500,000 people per year, but that's actually a lie.
Yes.
What that 500,000 actually refers to is the 500,000 people that they are converting into Canadian citizens versus the other 2.5 million or 2 million people that they're bringing in per year. So the 2.5 total, 500,000 are being welcomed as Canadian citizens. There's still 200 additional more million people that are going through the processes. So while he says that number is 500,000, it's actually 5 times larger than what he talks about. So he's still downplaying that. But then I think another portion of the conversation that he was having, and when I was listening it to the portion of the video, and I'll play the video inside of here for what I can care to listen to, because it's being interrupted by a lot of drum beats in the background. So you don't get to hear a lot of what Trudeau is saying, which is actually a pretty good thing. But I'll throw in a clip of what he's actually saying. But he blames it on temporary foreign workers, and then he also blames it on foreign students.
It's really important to understand the context around immigration. Every year we bring in about 450, now close to 500,000 permanent residents a year. And that is part of the necessary growth of Canada. It benefits our citizens, our communities, it benefits our economy. These are the levels that we have stabilized and grown steadily over the past years, because that's what Canada needs to continue to have a strong economy and strong communities. However, over the past few years, we've seen a massive spike in temporary immigration, whether it's temporary foreign workers or whether it's international students in particular, that have grown at a rate far beyond what Canada has been able to absorb.
But even still, like, I know right now in Canada, we just crossed over the threshold where it's 1 million foreign students inside of the universities, and that's in 1.4 or 1.5 million seats that are held in universities. So it's about 60%, 63 or 66% of the universities are filled with foreign students. Are those numbers in close to what you've seen?
Yeah, first of all, the 500,000 number, that is strictly speaking landed immigrants. So they are permanent residents. Then they become citizen after a certain period of time. The international students, again, even with the reduced intake for the next 2 years at 364,000, you're looking at almost 750,000 in 2 years. And if you have a housing shortage now, then another 750,000 new people is only going to exacerbate that problem.
And speaking
There,
specifically about that, is like, these are into universities and colleges, correct?
yes,
So these places that have seen these huge influxes of people living in, they're the areas that are going to be the most stressed with affordable housing requirements, because this is the situation that already exists there. You're not going to make that smaller by slowing down the trickle of the tap. You need to shut it off until we can get caught up with the situation.
True. And this is a little bit complex because a student, and I'm making air quotes here, student can be registered in one college but living in a completely different city. It's just a backdoor to immigration. Now, this has also become possible to say out loud in recent months. Previously, it wasn't possible. But it's just a backdoor to immigration. Many of them have come here only to work and somehow establish themselves in Canada. And I wish them all the best. But the kind of situation in which they are being lured, I'm using that word advisedly, uh, is not conducive to a prosperous life. But they have been sold a bill of goods. They come here, often resorting to less than honest means to come here. They have come here to work. Some of them, they are not necessarily living in the city where their college is located. There is even one college that doesn't exist physically. I I
And I've
checked
seen
it out.
I've seen you talking about that, and I've seen that you've even reached out to Premier David Eby about that college. Talk about that college, because this is a really interesting story. Talk about that for a second, if you can.
Sure. See, this was, I think, in January when someone forwarded me a Reddit post where the person said that another young person from India whom he knows uh, had been admitted to this college, but the college does not exist. So now the person is in a stress because the person had come with a genuine intention to gain some education, and now there is no college. So I followed up on that. The address given was in Canada Place in Vancouver, which is a prestigious location. And someone went there, found that there is no college there. Then we teamed up, half a dozen of us. And on phone, the person from the college said that it is located in Surrey. Then their website disappeared. Then it reappeared with a new address, but in Vancouver, not in Surrey. And then a friend of mine went there. That day there had been a lot of snow, so everything was closed, but there was no sign there of that college. Then in March, I was there in Vancouver. So I said, okay, why don't I go there? I went there. The college is not located in the premises, but there is another college there. And I inquired there, and they said, yeah, if you enroll with this college, then, I mean, the non existent college, then the education will be provided by the college which does exist. So at that point, there is a question mark as to how you need a separate college to qualify a student to come here and then get educated at some other college. I put out a thread about that also because it's massively complicated, and it's clearly not something that we should allow in
Well,
Canada. Now
there's fraud going on there somehow.
yeah, the college has the designated learning institution. It has the certification from British Columbia government for educational quality assurance for a college that doesn't exist physically. So it has become a complete, circus. This whole international student or study permit thing has become a complete circus. Now in Ontario, there is a major change now because private colleges will not be eligible to bring over students from overseas. It's only limited to public colleges and universities. But in British Columbia, it is still on.
BC is a funny place. I don't know what goes on there, but it's a funny place. And that's all I'm
Yeah,
going
but
to
you
say
see,
about that.
the impact of this is something very profound that struck me only a couple of days ago, which is that until now, no matter which country you are looking at in the West, Indians have been seen as a model minority. Now that perception has changed in Canada to a very significant degree. And there are issues with that description, model minority. But without going into that, if you take it in a positive sense, these are law abiding people, uh, well educated and hardworking. They are positive contributors to society. And just the other day, someone sent me an image of uh, Indians in USA that head 20 major corporations. We are all familiar with the names of Sundar Pichai and Satya Nadella and all. But there are 20 of them heading companies, corporations that we are all familiar with their names of. So why don't we have that in Canada? That's a question to ask. Because on that video of the attack on that car, a lot of responses were lampooning India. And my point was, it's not about the country of origin, it's about the country of destination. Look at what kind of people we are attracting. Because we have thrown it open, anybody can come in. So anybody is coming in. This is the kind of crowd that you are attracting. You are not attracting the Satya Nadellas of India.
Yeah, and those that are coming in that are affluent are settling in the more affluent communities because they don't want to be in areas that are high crime either.
Yeah, see, the thing is, in our economy, unfortunately, today, the lucrative activities are all some kind of a scam. I'm sorry to say this, but speculating in real estate, mortgage fraud, setting up these shady colleges, LMIA, that is another battle that's now
I
I've
was going
started.
to talk to you about that, but I know you've got your story that's going out to one of the MSM. But go on with what you're saying, and then we'll talk about the LMIAs.
See, what happens is it's basically labor market impact assessment. So
Yeah.
it proves that there is no Canadian available for this job. Therefore, we are bringing over a worker from overseas or hiring a person here who is on a temporary visa like a student. But there is so much fraud going on there. And by law, the employer is not supposed to even recover the $1,000 fee that has to be paid to the government for obtaining that LMIA. But they are charging anything like $40,000, $50,000 to the person who wants the job. Now, this is very relevant because I see a lot of people saying that when Indians own a business, they hire only their own kind. But it is not a preference for their own kind. It's this money. If my kid wants to get a job or your kid, they will not be willing to pay $50,000 to get a job. They're going to get paid, not to pay. But if I'm able to hire 10 of such temporary residents at 50K piece, then I'm comfortable. $500,000 of income for doing nothing. And that is what is driving a lot of social animosity towards a specific demographic, that is Canadians of Indian origin. But the whole animosity is based on a misdiagnosis of what is going on, which is that these desperate people are willing to pay $50,000. Now, naturally, they don't have $50,000 in cash to pay. So that is typically recovered from their wages. So now we have wage theft going on. We have so many other issues, and there is no housing, so they are living like 20 of them in one basement, sharing a mattress with another guy. On Reddit there is this subreddit called Slum Lords in Canada or something like that, where you see the kind of listings that they pull up from the internet and highlight. They are completely third world conditions in which we are forcing people to live.
Yeah, we've duped them in here, pay them nothing, stack them on top of each other, put them in conditions that are worse or equal to what they came from to sell them on the Canadian dream, and then wonder why we see hostility, wonder why we see animosity, wonder why we see an increase in crime. I mean, with poverty comes crime.
Yes.
When you can't survive, when you can't afford to feed yourself, of course there's going to be crime. Crime goes up. We'd all seen that at the start of 2020 when they started locking places down. Actually, I think we first started seeing it as soon as Trudeau collapsed the economy by 2016. The increase in crime that just followed him being allowed in here was amazing. And then a lot of his policies have driven a lot of this. I mean, what we see out in Toronto, where we see, the highest rates of violent crimes, highest rates of vehicle thefts, highest rates of gun crime. And he says that he's mitigating all of these, and it's the conservatives that are causing these issues, but it's his policies that are directly responsible for this. Now, in order for, and this goes back to when I was in staffing some time ago, and we'd actually looked at bringing in nurses and healthcare staff from other countries, because even prior to COVID, healthcare in Canada was in a desperate situation. And more so along that was in personal support workers, because it's a very low paying job, and it's kind of a terrible job.
Yes.
By my standards, it's terrible. I'm sure that there are some compassionate people out there that are able and love to do what they do, but the pay sucks, the job sucks, and to try and get people in to do those jobs is kind of terrible. So what we were working at doing is getting actual nurses that had their education in from the international nursing colleges or universities, getting them into Canada. But even then, they still had to upgrade their triage in order for them to be qualified as a nurse. So they would come as highly certified nurses from other countries into Canada to work as a personal support worker for $20 an hour. But even then, they had to have, their basic kits, their necessities covered. They had to have some money in the bank. They couldn't come here and live off of the government, which we're seeing a lot of now. And also at the same time, I believe the period was 2 years. So they had to stay with an employer for 2 years in order to qualify to immigrate into Canada. And if they'd left and found another employer, the clock restarted. Is that still the case?
I haven't looked into that, frankly. But this whole terminology about needing to upgrade your knowledge or your qualification is reeking of condescension. There may be local differences here, but you can't look down on foreign qualification. There has to be a way to figure out whether if there is any gap between what the person knows and what we do here. But there is no necessarily no upgrading required. Now, I know that Pierre Poilievre has been talking about this, because the way there is a Red Seal program for trades, which allows a person to work in their trade across Canada, is proposing to set up a Blue Seal program for professionals, not just from overseas, but also within Canada. So that, you go through one exam, you prove that you are, in sync with what we do here in Canada. And then you're good to go. You can work anywhere. I don't know how far he will succeed, because I've been hearing about this for the 20 years that I've been here. Hopefully he does. But that is a major obstacle, for immigrants to succeed, especially the ones who are qualified in those areas, for them to succeed. Because I have known people who came here with a medical degree and had to spend another decade basically to get certified to work here. Some time ago, there was a case reported by CBC where there was this lady doctor from Iran who did all the courses here, but then she couldn't be certified because by that time her certification in Iran had expired. So now she would have had to go back to Iran, work there, and then reactivate her certification there, and then come back here. I mean, we specialize in wasting human capital. This is my somewhat harsh conclusion here. But we just waste human capital, and then we wonder why the economy is not doing as well as it is capable of.
And on the trades, and I don't disagree with you, because I do 100%. There are certain occupations, I think, that are, in the higher echelons, where we have to look at somebody's qualifications and appreciate, But at the same time, if there are fake colleges that people are applying to, there's also going to be fake degrees. And we've already seen those degree mills out of the States. I could have been anything I wanted to for $50.
Yeah.
So we do need to have some standards, and we do want to have some vetting, when it comes to especially our healthcare, for sure, absolutely. And I agree with that. But I think I'm sure I'd seen a couple of your tweets that talked about the Journeyman or the Red Seal trades tickets where people were able to buy those. Is that
Yes.
correct?
Yeah, someone put out an ad saying I'm able to give it to anyone who is interested for money. And this was a post on social media. Now, I don't know whether this was just a scam they were running and there was no certification at the end of it. But this is something, see, we are very poor in investigating these troublesome areas where, a college can be online but not existing physically, and nobody has figured out that, there's something wrong here. Or colleges that are not, there are colleges with graduation rate of 3%, 3.5%, somewhere there, which data exists, but nobody has followed up on that.
There was I think it was just over the last week where there was a number of people lined up in Toronto. And I'm going to say they looked predominantly Indian, and they were all upset because they were, I think, on their third time of taking a class and they'd all failed again.
Yeah, again, it's a complex issue because, in some cases, the expectation is that since they are paying high fees, they should have passed. Then there are students who are not necessarily attending college. They are working two jobs and barely surviving. And it started from my city here in Brampton, where there is a location of Algoma University, where the students had been failed en masse. And then they were demonstrating, and there were some negotiations.
That was it. That was in Brampton. Yeah. Okay.
That was in Brampton. Then later on, there was another incident over in at Cape Breton University out east. So, again, you don't know who is actually at fault here, or maybe the fault is on both sides. But as I said, we are very poor in investigating these things. So you never get to a concrete understanding of what transpired.
Yeah. So we have people that are coming in that are unvetted. We're hyper qualifying trained medical professionals to unvet them from the marketplaces. We have colleges that are issuing degrees that don't exist or taking students that don't exist. And then we have other universities or colleges that have such a low percentage of graduation rates that they're only in it for turning, if they can't get more students, they'll keep the same students paying the same money.
Right.
And the way that we're bringing people in is through their LMIAs, is that a large portion of the funds that they could be making otherwise to make life more affordable for themselves in Canada is being taken or stolen by the employers, and they're being stacked up in conditions that are worse than third world countries, or at least on par from a place that they'd look to escape.
True. Just today, I was talking to an immigration consultant because I put out this tweet saying all this LMIA fraud. The major MSM unit is interested in covering this story. So a lot of people have reached out to me. So one of them was an immigration consultant, and he said that he has written personally to Immigration Canada, to IRCC, giving names, saying this is a person who is doing this. Can you please check them out? Just investigate. Don't take my word for it, but at least investigate. Nothing gets done. And on the other side, with rising population, there is going to be increased demand on everything from housing to infrastructure and everything else, healthcare, for example. But Chrystia Freeland was out there saying that Canada has a lot of social capacity to absorb new immigrants. So what is social capacity? There's no such thing. You just made something up. There is no social capacity. There can be physical capacity, and that's it.
Capacity is capacity.
Yeah. I mean, then, in Nova Scotia, the government is officially asking people if they have spare bedrooms in their homes. Is that what they mean by social capacity? Because at some point, I don't want the government to mandate renting out your spare bedroom.
Well, I think Olivia Chow talked about the same thing about taking migrants into your home if you have extra spaces. And I have seen, and I don't know if it's official documents where people have suggested that, based on your city assessment, for the number of rooms inside of your home and the size of your home for the number of occupants you have, that in future, just like what they're doing right now in parts of British Columbia, where you're not allowed to Airbnb your house anymore. You have to convert it into long-term living. They're saying that the same thing will happen to people. They'll either be taxed additional on the empty house that they have if they don't want to take in immigrants, or they'll be credited if they're willing to take in other people. And to me, that sounds like a terrible idea. If we're not vetting the people that are coming in, I mean, there's
It is.
billets have
It
been
is a terrible idea.
yeah, billets have existed in Canada since hockey, right? And I mean, the last person I'd want living in my house, and I know a lot of great hockey players, so don't get me wrong here, is a hockey player. But that's for reasons because, my children have moved out and, they're back and forth. I've got grandchildren now. So, I mean, it's not me being racist. There are certain things that would make me question. But for the most part, now that me and my wife are somewhat empty nesters here, we're done.
Right. But then you want to, first of all, age in place. You don't want to move. If you wanted to move, then, there may be limited options for you to move to. And at the same time, because somebody else's failure has created a housing crisis, you cannot be forced to share your home with someone you don't want.
That's it. And one of the problems that the housing market and the interest rates have created inside of Canada is that people can't afford to downsize. And that seems insane. You have a larger home, you want to move into a smaller home for less payments, but given the equity that you have in your current place, if you do decide and go and renew your mortgage at current interest rates, then you can't actually afford to live more affordably in Canada.
True. See, ultimately, this is like, if you think of a trading company where someone decides that they want to bring in more merchandise without checking with the warehouse guy whether there is space. That's what has happened. Without checking with the finance guy as to whether the funds are there to pay for that merchandise. Without checking with the receivables guy to see how much credit you can give in the market without exposing the company to more risk of customer default. See, the decision has to be optimized from various angles. Here, and I have said this openly, they are projecting as if the world is going to run out of people very soon, and we should get as many of them as we can before supplies run out. Supplies are not going to run out. You have to look at your local capacity, which now belatedly Prime Minister Trudeau has acknowledged today. You have to match it to your capacity to have all those people, because, and Minister Miller was I mean, it was a Freudian slip maybe, but he said that these are lucrative assets and big box stores and other employers are looking for cheap labor. And you want them to have a prosperous future or not? See, that was the paradigm for immigration for a very long time, where at least that was the expectation. It may not have turned out so well for many immigrants, but that was the expectation that people will come to Canada, become Canadian, and become reasonably prosperous so that they feel happy about being a Canadian. That has been thrown out the window. You think all of these millions of people who face such a bleak future in Canada are going to be happy to be Canadian? I doubt that. And that is a powder keg we are sitting on. It will manifest after 10 years maybe. But it's a powder keg right now.
Well, it is. And I mean, especially when we see stories of like it was in Q4 of 2023 where the government had spent some $763 million on hotel rooms for immigration. So we have and where this was, and I'd started talking about this in August last year, saying, we got a lot of people living in the streets. It's going to be winter in a couple of short months here. So we're either going to have a lot of corpsicles, we're going to have a lot of dead Canadians in the street, or we're going to have to start addressing some problems. But at the same time, we've got hotels at capacity that we're importing people into Canada, putting them in hotel rooms, spending, and I mean, by the time Q1 of 2024 had hit, well, I mean, we just closed down Q1 of 2024, like what, 2 days ago, right? So, we're in January of Q1 of 2024, and now they're proposing another 350 million. So that's $1 billion in support. So $1 billion taxpayer dollars to support more people coming into the country that we already can't house, that we're putting up in hotels. We've got tent cities and Canadians living in the streets. Is that causing some of the animosity that we're seeing on the Canadian side of things?
Definitely it is. And this is not a new problem. Because I remember January 2017 when Prime Minister Trudeau issued his tweet welcoming all refugees after President Trump had passed that executive order, what is known as the Muslim ban. It wasn't, but let's not digress. But after that, Prime Minister Trudeau put out a tweet saying, Canada welcomes you, and then Roxham Road opened up. Sometime after that, I think it was in the summer of 2017 or summer of 2018, when a hotel in Toronto was in the news because the refugees had been housed there, and the hotel was also accepting reservations from regular customers. And then some customer had written a review online and it blew up. This was near the intersection of Don Valley Parkway and 401, somewhere in that area in Toronto. And it blew up, and finally, the hotel just took themselves offline on that website. So it's not a new problem. The thing is this: if you have Canadians who have fallen on hard times and roughing it out on the streets, and at the same time, you see people basically barging into Canada, because normal refugee intake is a completely different thing. There is a well-established procedure for that. And here people were just walking into Canada and then being housed in hotels. It is bound to cause resentment. Regardless of, all the other arguments, human nature being what it is bound to create resentment that, these people used to be maybe productive Canadians, or regardless, even if they weren't, they are Canadians. So we owe it to them to provide them whatever they need. And if we can't, then at the same time, if you are providing hotel accommodation, and there's even some money that they are given. So if you're providing that to people who have basically barged into Canada, then it's bound to create a lot of resentment among Canadians.
And there were a large number of people that were let in initially. Because I mean, Trudeau's been in power, we're in what, year 8 now? So there was a lot of people that were brought in under these immigration programs, in the early years still, and like when you'd mentioned during the Muslim ban, that still aren't working today. And I think that number that I'd seen most recently was 50%. 50% of the people that we brought in, and I don't know what the actual net number would look like, but let's call it 100,000, conservatively speaking. So let's say we have 50,000 people that have spent almost a decade in Canada on our social services. Those people have no intentions of getting a job, do they? Like,
even if they do, there is no system to help them do that. See, if you're saying that people can come here as refugees, then you need to set up a system where they can then pursue their own economic future. They are coming in cold, right?
Mhm.
So they need that support to be guided into work, some kind of work. It may be a job, it may be a business. Now, CBC kept writing about that chocolatier family in the Maritimes somewhere. And that's a good success story, but we need more of those.
Yeah.
You don't want people to come here and then be at such a dead end that they cannot be economically active.
There has to be some sort of way to assimilate if we're gonna take in people en masse. Then we have to have a plan in place for, again, I'm not saying create their success, but if we're taking people from war-torn countries and we want to think that we're rescuing them, I have to think that if somebody was to rescue me from a war zone to put me on welfare in a low quality form of lifestyle, that really doesn't seem like they'd be doing me any favors. I don't think I'd be that appreciative of it. But if I don't know what else to do, how do you even escape that, right?
Right. See, work is not just something that helps you make a living. I believe that we derive our sense of self-worth from the work we do. And it doesn't matter what kind of work it is, because in a functioning society, all kinds of work is necessary. Garbage collection as necessary as a doctor, for example, right? Now, I have personally met a Syrian refugee who came here as a refugee, then worked to get a job in a bank, one of the big five banks. And then by the time I met her, she was a financial advisor. Very heavy, thick Arabic accent, which I enjoyed hearing because of my days in the UAE. After a long time, I was hearing that accent. But successful refugee. Now, I want to see more of those, right? She was able to make her way, but not everybody can, or not everybody can be so lucky. So we need to have systems that help people in that regard, which we don't. See, it's all about pandering and virtue signaling. So we brought over 35,000 Syrian refugees. That is some kind of a badge of honor for the government of the day. But what happened afterwards? How did we help them to establish themselves in Canada? Now, if we didn't, then their sense of self-worth is going to be rock bottom.
No, and that's entirely it. Now there are the other side of what we are seeing, and it's again not to blame India as a country, not to blame Indians, but there is some exploitations that are going on inside of those, and I see it, these people that are showing up to apply for, I'm going to say, jobs that are not an average means in brand new vehicles. And all they have for qualifications is a piece of paper with an immigration status on it. So, I mean, like, for me to consider going out and buying a new vehicle right now, having lived in the country my entire life and worked here, and, in this economy, I have zero interest in that. But other people are pulling up to, these jobs with fresh off, I want to say, like, fresh off the plane, in brand new designer gear with smoking set of wheels. So there's the other side of that. What do you know about that side, Darshan?
components to it. One of it is show of culture. And I don't mean to be judgmental here, but there are parts of India where it is stronger, Punjab being one of those. So, guy has aspirations of having that high-end vehicle. Then there are, car dealers who kind of exploit that tendency to get them approved without any credit history, no credit, no problem, bad credit, no problem, kind of. So then they get them approved for a few months. The boys moving around in those flashy wheels, and then he can't make payments, so it has to be it goes in repossession. That is one component. Another is a lot of these international students. They come from family of considerable means, so they have the money. They don't need a loan. They'll just buy it outright, cash payment. I don't know why they would show up for a minimum wage job. That's a mystery to me. Then there are what are known as IELTS marriages. IELTS, IELTS, that is the English language test that a student needs to score a certain level to get admitted to a college or university in Canada. So if a girl has a high IELTS score, then there will be marriage proposals from rich families for their sons because they want to send the son to Canada, but the son is not qualifying to get admission in any educational institution. So those are IELTS marriages. And that is a whole chapter in itself, because then, it's not a regular marriage. So there are issues of domestic violence and marriage is breaking down and things like that. But those boys would also be buying high-end cars, moving around. Again, no idea why they would show up for a minimum wage job. But those are the components that I see.
Now, and I'm not going to say that this only happens in the Indian community, because I've also seen this posts, and I can't confirm that this happened. This is just what I'm hearing, but from Ukrainian families that have come here. And if you can't tell by my last name, I'm not picking on Ukrainians, because I are one. So I mean, what's going on in the Ukraine right now? I can't wrap my head around. There's a lot more to the story than any of us will ever know. But I have seen stories where Ukrainians are coming here. They are, like you said, being provided credit cards and unlimited finances after a very short amount of time. They are purchasing vehicles, and then they're sending them to the Ukraine or sending them back home, and then they're disappearing. Now, if I've seen that happening, now, again, I haven't confirmed this, and I'm not speaking bad about Ukrainians, because again, I are one. But I mean, if this is the sort of the program that we're looking at, I mean, at some point the rubber is going to meet the road with, with these sort of con scams. And that's going to have a drastic impact on the borrowing capabilities from even the big five, or, the credit card companies for regular Canadians.
Yeah, because ultimately they will have their limits and ratios and all the compliances to take care of. So if X amount is lent out to a certain person, it cannot be lent out to another person.
That's
So
right. There's debt recovery. All businesses have to go through that. Look, if we look at Superstore, the really bad company in Canada, Galen West, and the guy that employs 220,000 Canadians, who's made 3%, but he's the bad guy, right? If you look at what kind of is factored into his profitability is loss, and that loss is when we look at produce that rots, or kids walking through and throwing a couple of grapes in their mouth. I mean, it's all loss. People that are literally going in and having to steal their groceries. And we see, and I don't know where, what it's looking like in Brampton, but in the Superstore that I go to, the buggy wheels lock now. If they suspect you of stealing something when you're trying to leave the store, the buggy wheels lock.
Yeah.
To get out of the self checkouts, there's a gate there that basically you have to wait to open up. And even entrance into the store, you walk in and you have to wait for the gates to open up.
Hmm.
So they've had to go through a lot of theft preventions to be able to retain their 3%. So we know that there's, a lot of that's lost. If you take hundreds of millions of dollars away from credit card companies, they're going to have to strap that onto the poor schleps who are still paying their bills if they can afford to. Like, what we're looking at is financial ruin inside of Canada. It's the most insane thing, isn't it?
Yeah, but according to Chrystia Freeland, we have social capacity. So
Yeah.
it should matter.
So it's good.
Social capacity. I don't know who comes up with these made up terms, but that is one of the problems with addressing these big issues in Canada that I have seen is that there is such a high level of tribalism that if someone is on one side, first of all, there shouldn't be a side. You just look at an issue. But once someone has committed to their side, they will not accept any counter argument to their position. For example, the National School Food Program that was announced with so much fanfare. I think it was yesterday.
Yeah.
And like, first of all, provinces already have their programs. There are charities that are, working together with provinces to make sure, there may be shortcomings, but it does not justify the national government to uh, basically set this up. They are saying $1 billion, and that is the talking point on the liberal side. But if you look at the legislation itself, it doesn't talk about any money. It's just in the announcement. The legislation says that the government has to formulate a plan. So it is like declaring the intention to do something, not doing that thing.
Yeah, and people are, the liberal supporters are making it seem like this is going to start immediately, and it's just a plan. So it's akin to the $80,000 that they were going to put towards the Arrive scam app. Only this is $1 billion, and we've seen how that 60,000 or 80,000 ballooned into 60 million.
Hmm.
How big is $1 billion going to grow to feed 400,000 students? And who's going to get rich off of that? And how much value are we going to actually see for that, right?
Yeah, this is best left to the grassroots level to tackle because they are the closest to the problem. There is going to be all sorts of restrictions on diet, allergies, religious restrictions, and stuff like that. So there's no way you can have a national program that can run anywhere near uh, efficiently. It can't because you're just dealing with too many variables at that level. It has to be at the local level where they can they are fleet-footed enough to adjust to every changing requirement. But you cannot convince people that this is a bad idea because they have committed to their side. Another problem with Canadian political debates is that once a factually incorrect statement gets introduced, no amount of refutation suffices to make it go away. I realized this back in, I think it was 2018, when the gentleman, I forget the name, who was the energy minister under Pierre Trudeau and who had introduced the national energy policy back in 1982, wrote an article in the Edmonton Journal saying that it was a bad idea. Now, this is the minister responsible who brought forward the policy, taking a second look after 36 years and saying it was a bad idea. But Pierre Trudeau's die-hard supporters were not willing to accept. This is from the horse's mouth. Why don't you accept it? Right? So you cannot make that idea go away no matter how much evidence you put forward, which means that what Michael Crichton has called the evolutionary algorithm. is notably absent in Canadian society. Evolutionary algorithm is you remember your previous experience. You remember the course of action you chose and you remember the outcome. So if the outcome was positive, then it reinforces your behavior. And if the outcome was negative, then you choose something else this time around. That is how the evolution is supposed to take place, where you look for a better outcome every time, or you stick with a good outcome when you had. That evolutionary algorithm is not at play because people will not accept a bad idea 36 years after the fact. So you
or
cannot
they'll
hope to do better.
downplay the impact of it because it was never tried properly.
Yeah, I mean that is a classic sign of socialism, where if something fails, that's because it wasn't tried properly,
Yeah.
not that it was a bad idea. I mean, it can infect the other side also. I'm not necessarily picking on socialists here. Only thing is my tuning for that is much higher because of the fact that I grew up in a socialist India. Back then, it was officially a socialist country, although not full out communist. It was still socialist, so I'm better tuned for that. But you have to be honest about your mistakes because, as the saying goes, the first step in resolving a problem is to admit that you have it. But if you refuse to say that this is even a problem, then you are not going to do better the next time. Now, same thing with pharmacare. And I've written, I think, about 9 or 10 articles about the state of Canadian healthcare, all with official data from StatScan, from OECD, from CIHI, that is Canadian Institute of Health Information. And people still refute my main argument saying your data is wrong. How can my data be wrong? I have sourced it from official sources. So, with pharmacare, with much fanfare, they made the announcement, but it was basically for contraception, and I think there was something else, diabetes or something.
Diabetes, yeah.
Diabetes.
I didn't see the specificities behind that. I mean, they say it's insulin, but there's a lot of different things that go in towards diabetic care, right?
Right.
So, everything from the testing to, there's other like other drugs that diabetics are put on. There's now Ozempic that they're trying diabetics on to help them lower body mass and insulin resistance. I mean, it's a very complicated issue, and we don't know what that covers, but it's an $800 million program. If they wanted to balloon it out to the size that they want, it turns into a $50 billion program, and I believe that's per year.
Well, it won't stay that low, 50 billion.
Yeah, no, it's a massive program. Because I've done the same thing, had to look at it and the costs. And it's incredible. But I mean, my aspect on Canada Health and what they're proposing here are completely different. I'd rather look at source or root causes to conditions instead of more expensive pharmaceutical band-aids to keep strapping on top of more expensive pharmaceutical band-aids. When I looked at the statistics of it, basically what they'd said is there were information from, I think it was 2020, 2021, and I don't want to quote it too much, but what it looked like is if you're over the age of 80, 30% of the population is on 10 or more prescription drugs.
Okay.
Like that's a lot of people. 1 in 3 seniors that's lived to over the age of 80 is on 10 or more prescription drugs. And I can guarantee you they didn't need any of those drugs to get them to the years 1 to 79. But here they are now. So strapping more into that and then turning that into a taxpayer problem is a huge situation. And I'm going through this. I do have a family member that's in the hospital right now with some issues. They're chronic issues, but they're chronic because his diet is poor. And when you have a poor diet, then you're going to have the same chronic issues that come up. And as much as I can coach him, and here's the thing is he's vegetarian, which is not a path that I choose for anybody, because I don't believe that, well, I mean, I have a different stance on food consumption, and I'm not going to say that vegetarian is terrible, but I do say that there is more information that people need before they can opt for it as an option. What it's going to lead to is malnutrition and deficiencies, which is catastrophic in a lot of lives. There are balances, but where he is he's a junk food vegetarian.
Mhm.
So when he tells his doctors that he's a vegetarian, they say, well, that's really good. That should eliminate a lot of problems, but they don't actually look at the diet that he does, what he does consume as a part of the issue. Well, if you eat cake and cookies and pies and everything that you eat is processed,
Hmm.
you can't expect your health to be any good.
That's
There,
right.
it is a detrimental factor. Now, in saying that, he's a vegetarian, he's a junk food vegetarian. In saying that, I don't believe in vegetarianism. Um, I actually make him large pots of chili and soup that are vegetarian, and all honest, no animal products. Keeping away from seed oils, keeping away from adding sugars, using natural ingredients, buying fresh, cutting fresh.
Mhm.
And when he'll maintain a diet, he does well.
Mhm.
And he does well, and he goes to the grocery store and then buys himself a bunch of cookies and pies and shit, and then he ends up back in the hospital. So all in the same thing, his doctor says it's not his diet. But he was having some issues, and I said, well, you can start looking at cruciferous vegetables, because what they'll do is, and I explained to him, what broccoli does, and he goes, my doctor says I can't have broccoli. It's like I just watched you eat a tray of cupcakes. Well, my doctor said that was okay. Now wait a second here. Your doctor said you can eat cupcakes, but specifically told you to stay away from from broccoli. Oh, sulfur. Sulfur, the third most abundant mineral in the human body. And it's good in cruciferous vegetables. So you try and say to somebody, listen, sulfur is actually pretty good for your body, unless you're allergic. And he goes, no, I can't eat broccoli. Like, you just ate a tray of cake, man. And if your doctor's telling you that the cake's okay and the broccoli's not good, find another doctor.
Yeah. No, I'm from a vegetarian background. I'll tell you. There are even in Indian cuisine, there are myriad ways of eating unhealthy while remaining vegetarian. Because the word itself is sort of misleading, because people think you are talking about vegetables, but there's a lot of other stuff that goes into it, and you can be eating very unhealthy. So there is deep fried stuff, there is stuff with a lot of fat in it. There's this thing called GHEE, which is good for health, but only in a certain proportion. And then there is stuff that, like, too many chilies, that will impact your stomach. So that has to be eaten in moderation. So there is a lot of ways of eating unhealthy while remaining Indian vegetarian. So I can see that, yeah. But the point is that if the government wants to be in charge of providing prescription medications to everyone, then in future, parties will be campaigning on reducing wait times for prescription medication. People won't be getting them in time. There will be a wait list, just like there is today for medical treatment under our so-called universal health care,
Yeah.
where somebody is deciding whether you get treatment or not. We get all these horror stories being reported in media from time to time, like
20,000 people a year dying because they can't get treatment.
yeah, in Ontario there is a specific case where there's something called keratoconus, which affects the cornea of teenage people mostly. The treatment exists, and gradually, if untreated, gradually the patient goes blind. The treatment has existed for a long time, but it is not covered by the provincial health plan. But if the young person does go blind, then restorative surgery is covered by the provincial health plan. So there have been cases reported in the media of teenage boy or girl getting keratoconus and some good Samaritan pitching in with cost of treatment which can be north of $10,000. They go to the US, get treatment, and then come back. So it becomes a matter of control rather than providing the service. There was an article in CBC, in fact, some time ago. In Manitoba, there is like spinal cord surgery. The wait list is 6 months, and there are 200 cases on the wait list and 7 surgeons who can do that surgery. So why is there a waiting list? I mean, this works out to something like 28 operations per surgeon. So I'm sure you can catch up in no time. But there is a waiting list because there is a waiting list. And that's what happens in socialist systems. I grew up in a country where there were waiting lists for buying a wristwatch.
All right, Darshan, like I said, we are closing up on an hour here. So what is your final message to Canadians? What should we be looking out for in the months and years coming, or to keep us protected even right now? How do we survive
Right now-
Justin Trudeau?
No, right now, I'm working on this labor market impact assessment scam, which is very big actually. Because look at it this way: if one person is paying $40,000 for one LMIA, and you have 100,000 of them being sold, that's a $4 billion market every year, and that is illegal. And I'm sure the number is higher than 100,000 of LMIAs. So you are looking at a potentially $10 billion illegal activity. So that is something that I'm working on. Hopefully, these MSM guys will do a good report on that, because they said that they want to talk to Minister Miller after that. And then after that, whatever issue comes up, I'll take them up and then try to make an issue out of that on public forum.
Everything else in stride. And I think the big message that what you're saying here, Darshan, and one of the reasons that I wanted to have you on one of my shows is because there's not enough of us Canadians that are speaking out. So in much the same way, you have a publication, you have a Twitter profile, you're also doing your YouTube channel.
Mm-hmm.
We need more Canadians standing up and speaking out what they're talking about.
True.
So keeping the conversations going. And I just got off the phone where I had a Zoom meeting earlier with David Parker, and he said it's about action. Declaration, when we put out a statement, is not an action. The action of a conversation, that's where we start to make changes. All right, Darshan, thanks again for coming out onto one of my HeartBeat episodes, and I look forward to follow-ups with your LMIA scams.
Thank you for having me.
I hear the sounds of your heartbeat. I can hear it now. I can hear